Every war has victims. Every war has survivors. But every war also has beneficiaries. People, governments, and institutions that emerge from the chaos not weaker, but stronger. Not poorer, but richer. And the most important question you can ask about any conflict isn't who started it. It's who needed it to happen. So let's ask that question directly. The Israel-Iran conflict is dominating every headline, every news cycle, every urgent government briefing around the world. Millions of people are watching. Billions of dollars are moving. Alliances are shifting. Maps are being redrawn. And somewhere inside all of that noise, there are actors who are not panicking, who are not scrambling, who are, quietly, watching this unfold exactly as they hoped it would. Who are those actors, and what do they actually want? That's what this is really about. First, let's understand what we're looking at. Israel and Iran have been in a state of undeclared war for decades. Proxies, cyber operations, assassinations, and economic pressure. The conflict is now broken into the open. Direct strikes, direct responses. A threshold crossed that hadn't been crossed before. The world is calling it a crisis, and it is. But crises are not neutral events. They redistribute power. They move money. They open doors that were previously closed and close doors that were previously open. And the people who understand that, who planned around it, are already positioned on the other side of what's coming. But here's the part no one talks about. The loudest voices demanding attention in this conflict are not always the ones with the most at stake. And the quietest voices, the ones issuing careful statements, making measured calls for de-escalation, expressing deep concern, are sometimes the ones with the most to gain. That gap between what is said and what is true is where the real story lives. Let's start with the most obvious place: energy. Oil has always been the silent narrator of Middle Eastern conflict. Every major crisis in this region for the past 50 years has had an oil dimension, whether it was acknowledged or not. This one is no different. The moment Israeli strikes hit Iranian soil, Brent crude moved significantly. And the moment Iran signaled it might respond near the Strait of Hormuz, it moved again. For every dollar oil rises, there are governments, sovereign wealth funds, and energy corporations that collect that difference multiplied across millions of barrels per day. The math is not complicated. Higher instability equals higher prices, equals higher revenue for anyone sitting on large hydrocarbon reserves who isn't directly involved in the fighting. Russia understands this arithmetic better than almost anyone. Moscow's entire economic model at this moment depends on energy revenues. Sanctions have constrained its options. The war in Ukraine has drained its reserves. But an oil price spike triggered by Middle Eastern conflict is effectively a sanction bypass. It replenishes what was taken. Some analysts believe that Russia's posture in this crisis, vocal enough to appear relevant, restrained enough to avoid commitment, is not confusion. It is calibration. Stay close to Iran diplomatically. Don't do enough to stop the escalation, and collect the revenue that instability generates. It's possible that Moscow sees this conflict not as a threat to manage, but as an asset to preserve. Something doesn't add up when you look at the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, nations with massive hydrocarbon reserves and budgets directly tied to oil prices, have issued statements of concern, calls for restraint, expressions of worry about regional stability. And those statements are genuine in one sense. No Gulf state wants a war that collapses the regional economy or drags them into direct conflict. But they are also collecting every extra dollar that elevated oil prices produce.
The tension between what Gulf governments say publicly and what their Treasury departments are calculating privately is a gap worth paying attention to. And this changes everything when you look at the defense industry. Wars consume equipment. Missiles, interceptors, munitions, surveillance systems, precision-guided weapons. All of it has a manufacturer. All of it has a supplier. All of it has a price. The moment a conflict of this scale goes live, procurement orders accelerate. Contracts that were pending get signed. Production lines that were idle get restarted. Governments that had been hesitating on defense spending find the political will overnight. The global defense industry doesn't celebrate conflict, but it does respond to it. And the response is always the same direction. More orders, higher revenues, rising valuations. But here's the part that gets genuinely uncomfortable. It's not just the obvious players. It's the political class inside multiple countries who need this conflict for domestic reasons that have nothing to do with the Middle East at all. Look at the pattern. A government facing economic difficulty, declining approval ratings, or a fractious political coalition suddenly has a foreign policy crisis to navigate. The crisis demands national unity. It demands support for leadership. It suppresses domestic dissent under the banner of wartime solidarity. It changes the subject. This is not a new phenomenon. It has appeared in democracies and autocracies alike across centuries of political history. It doesn't require anyone to plan a war. It only requires that when a war begins, certain people recognize its domestic utility and stop working quite as hard to end it. Some analysts believe that this dynamic is operating in more than one capital right now, that the urgency to de-escalate is being quietly softened by the political convenience of managed tension. That some leaders are hoping the crisis stays at precisely the temperature that generates useful pressure at home, without boiling over into something they can no longer control. This raises questions that are genuinely difficult to ask in polite political discourse, but they are not irresponsible questions. They are the questions that every serious student of power has to ask. Who benefits from the continuation of this crisis? And are those people the same people who have the most ability to stop it? Now let's look at this from three different angles, because the real picture here is layered. The official narrative is straightforward. This conflict was forced on the participants. Israel acted in self-defense. Iran is asserting its sovereignty and deterrence. The nations calling for de-escalation are genuinely concerned about stability. Nobody wanted this. Nobody benefits from it. The goal of every responsible actor is to return to a managed equilibrium as quickly as possible. This narrative is not false. It reflects real positions held by real people, but it is incomplete. The strategic interests narrative goes further. In this reading, several actors had structural reasons to allow this conflict to develop beyond a certain point. Russia needed the oil revenue and the distraction of American attention. Parts of the Gulf establishment needed higher energy prices to fund domestic commitments. Defense industries needed a live conflict to validate procurement decisions. And certain political leaders needed the rally around the flag dynamic that only a genuine external threat can provide. None of these actors started the war, but some of them stopped the mechanisms that might have ended it sooner. The deeper systemic explanation is the most unsettling. It suggests that the real beneficiary of this conflict isn't any single nation, industry, or leader. It's the system itself. The global architecture of power that has been under sustained pressure for the past decade. A world order that was built around American primacy, open trade, and the dominance of Western-aligned institutions is fracturing. Multiple powers are competing to define what replaces it, and conflict, managed, sustained, never quite resolved,
serves the interests of that competition by keeping old alliances active, new alliances forming, and the flow of weapons, money, and influence moving in ways that consolidate power at the top of every hierarchy. The war isn't an accident in this reading. It's a symptom of a global system that has not yet found its next equilibrium and will continue generating crises until it does. Here is what makes all of this harder to sit with. The people paying the highest price for this conflict are not the ones benefiting from it. The civilians in border communities who cannot sleep, the families separated by the economics of displacement, the workers in countries far from the fighting, whose livelihoods are squeezed by oil prices they cannot control and supply chains they cannot fix. The students, the farmers, the small business owners in nations that have no seat at any table where these decisions are made, and no mechanism to demand one. That gap between those who benefit and those who pay is not unique to this conflict. It has existed in every major geopolitical crisis in modern history, but it has never been more visible than it is right now. We have more information, more connectivity, more ability to see the full picture than any previous generation. And yet the pattern continues. So here is the question that this conflict ultimately forces onto the table. If we can identify who benefits, if we can trace the money, follow the leverage, map the political incentives, and name the systems that profit from sustained instability, what exactly are we supposed to do with that knowledge? Because understanding who benefits from a war is not the same as being able to stop one.
And the gap between those two things, between knowing and changing, may be the most important political problem of our time. The conflict between Israel and Iran will eventually reach some kind of pause, a ceasefire, a new deterrence ceiling, a temporary equilibrium. It always does. But the interests that fed on this crisis will still be there when it ends, still calculating, still positioning, still waiting for the next window. And the real question isn't whether another crisis is coming. It's whether the world will still be asking who benefits, or whether it will finally start asking something harder. Who decided it was acceptable for anyone to benefit at all?